value the time that I was able to spend with him last night this morning. He's a proud product of East Long Meadow High School in Western Mass, where he excelled as an undersized linebacker. He did the same at the United States Naval Academy, where he started as inside linebacker on the 1972 team. Graduated in 1973 and became a naval aviator. The next chapter may have been his best. He became Navy's top fighter pilot, achieving Top Gun status, migrating to head flight instructor, and ultimately CEO of the Top Gun program. Not surprisingly, he was hired by Paramount to be the aerial coordinator for the movie Top Gun. He flew the Russian MiG-28 against Maverick and Goose, where he was the recipient of Maverick's famous upside-down flying, flipping the bird.
How'd you learn all this? We don't share this information.
Flew countless missions off aircraft carriers, commanded the U.S. amphibious flagships in the Persian Gulf and Saddam Hussein's ill-fated attempt to seize Kuwait in 1994, as well as commanded U.S. flagships off the coast of Somalia. Eventually became the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, which led to his appointment as Commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, PACOM.
PACOM, that's good. He was listening last night.
With all branches of the armed forces from California to the western border of India reporting to him. Retired from the Navy 2 years ago and is currently CEO of the nation's commercial nuclear power plant oversight organization. More combat and distinguished service medals that you can shake a stick at. When asked, Bob, what do you do best? He says, trying to figure out how to motivate 18 to 24-year-old men and women, sometimes in stressful situations, which is why we have asked our 4-star admiral to speak to us today. On behalf of the Harvard Athletic Department, we welcome.
So if you can't hear me, let me know, and I've got a mic up here that I can use as well. Great honor to be here at Harvard. The last time I was here was, I believe it was 2011. I was still in command of the United States Pacific Command, and I was delivering an address here in uniform, and we were talking about the big national strategies and security situation in the Asia Pacific. So it was a focus on North Korea, China, and some of the big strategic issues the United States is faced with. And it was a great crowd and some wonderful questions, as you would expect from that crowd. I'd like to thank David Wagner and Coach Weiss for the opportunity to speak to the athletic department. I'm immensely honored to be able to talk with you. Grew up in sports and ran into my college football coach when I was attending a Navy game at the Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium in Annapolis. First time I'd seen him since I graduated. I was in uniform because I was there at the invitation of the superintendent of the Naval Academy, and I walked into the Roger Staubach booth, overseeing a game, to see a friend of mine that I knew was there, and walked right into my coach. Couldn't think of anything to call him but coach. and it was a great reunion. So the impact that you have on us as we go through our lives is priceless. And we're going to talk a little bit about leadership today. We're going to talk a little bit about coaching today in the experience that I have had over my career. And I'm not going to talk about PACOM or the things that I did in the second half of my career. Rather, I'll give you a few sea stories that I hope you'll see the relevance of that deal more with my flying experience. But they're personal sea stories, and like any sea story, you can believe it or not. But believe me, they're true. So we'll look forward to a discussion. There are a couple slides that I'm going to present on these screens that I hope you can see that have a little academic purpose as it relates to leadership that I'd ask you to kind of view into and raise questions if you have them. But I very much look forward to the discussion. And again, a great, great pleasure to be here. So with that, we're going to test this system. I happen to find this on the internet, and this is an overview of my final Army-Navy football game in 1972. it's in black and white, so go figure I'm the old guy in the room. But that's my bona fides for being here talking with you. I went on following a Naval Academy experience that was a wonderful academic experience in its own right to selecting one of the variety of services that we can perform out of the Naval Academy. I picked a next sport, and in this case it was to fly. And we're given a choice based on our academic performance through a variety of communities, and this was the one that I chose, and I never looked back. A wonderful experience. We'll talk a little bit about what it's like, both from the carrier commander's perspective and a bit from the flying perspective, but this is what I spent about 17 consecutive years doing, flying off of aircraft carriers all over the world. And that's the F-14 Tomcat. You don't recognize it. Still working on the ability to change slides. Is there something I'm supposed to point at?
Try pointing that way.
If you know where the machine is, I can just say next slide. Oh, there you go. Okay, so there are a couple of videos in this that I hope you'll enjoy. This is one, and it begins kind of the story. So we'll see if we get it.
It's probably the single biggest test of air
music in the background, but the rest of you are far too young. There's a reason why I show you a dated documentary. Sea Legs came out when I had been flying for roughly 6 years. And at the time, I'd completed my first deployment in an aircraft carrier, and I'd been assigned to be an instructor in the F-14 replacement squadron at Miramar in San Diego, California. And I'd been there instructing for some months when this documentary was released, and we were obviously proud of it. But at the same time, going through kind of a rough spot in our squadron's life. The F-14 is a 2-seat airplane. The pilot sits in the front seat and has the flight controls and controls over weapon systems and whatnot. A radar intercept officer without flight controls sits in the back seat, controls the navigation systems, the radar systems, some of the weapon systems, and electronic countermeasures, and some of the other high-end systems in the airplane. We had to that date 4 mishaps in the squadron that I was in. Of the 8 aviators, we'd lost 6 of them. So they were all friends or acquaintances. And we'd had our commanding officer fired. We had a new commanding officer in place. And he gathered all of the instructor corps together and to have the talk. And one of the things that he talked to us about was the responsibility that we had as aviators that had been assigned instructor duties to do more in the airplane than would normally be called for by a pair of aviators out in a fleet squadron. Because now we had a student or a young person learning in either the front seat or the back seat as we were going flying. And that we shouldn't expect the same thing out of them that we would out of a qualified and proficient fleet pilot. I would tell you that in that experience, I learned a great deal about leadership, and I learned a great deal about the responsibility that we bear in coaching youth. When I went into this line of work, and we'll struggle a bit, I'm sure, through the slides, but the team changed. The average age of the sailor on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier is 19 and a half. Slide, please. And the demographics in the Navy have changed. Before I commanded my ship, in fact, as I was commanding an aircraft carrier, we had introduced and were introducing women into the frontline units of the Navy to include our aviation squadrons. And it has improved the Navy in immense ways. I think at the Naval Academy right now, the midshipman corps is made up of 25% women, and they're excelling both academically and when they get out into the fleet. So those gnarly pilots that you saw walking the aircraft carrier in the video were my teammates. So were those young people, and so were the women that had joined the Navy very recently. And so for those of us that had been around a while and were carrying leadership responsibilities in the Navy, it was a higher order calling than I'd ever experienced, at least in my career to date. I was talking to Jay about this earlier, Coach Weiss, there are 100,000 books out there on leadership. And in the nuclear power industry where I work now, we have a deficit, we think, of quality leadership, and it's growing worse because so many of the individuals that have a great deal of experience in the industry are retiring out. And that's true even of our colleges and universities as well. So leadership right now is at a premium. And one of the challenges that we all face is you can read 100,000 books and get 100,000 different definitions of what leadership is and isn't. We often confuse terms between your management responsibilities and your individual leadership responsibilities and what real teamwork is all about. And so in my work, we have endeavored to simplify that and establish the leadership attributes that are most important in my industry and in our responsibilities in my institute. And as well, we've viewed into the teamwork and team effectiveness attributes that go with that. And we looked through all the definitions of leadership that we could find, and we picked one that said leadership transcends management and inspires accomplishment. And at the end of the day, for you as coaches, for us as military leaders, this is what it was about. And it's not a foregone conclusion that we're ready to do this. And we'll talk a little bit about what the aptitude to be a leader and attributes to be a leader are. And I think you'll find that you can personalize them, certainly those of you in a high-end management and or leadership role right now in this school. So we'll begin with the aptitude issue. So this is, are leaders born or are leaders developed? I mean, we've been through those debates. In fact, I went through those debates with an advisory council that serves my particular institute. And it's made up of academics, it's made up of very high-end engineers, it's made up of business experts. And we asked that question, and believe it or not, we got mixed answers. And having been in the military, we would tell you that leaders are developed. In your coaching responsibilities, in the responsibilities of this athletic department, you're having impact on future leaders today. Every one of the people that you're inspiring must at some point in time confront their leadership responsibilities. So we divided into two pieces. The top half of that list has a little yellow word to the left of it that says trust. And on the bottom it says competence. And when I am endeavoring to select someone that is going into a high-performing, demanding leadership role in my company, I actually go to this list and screen them against those attributes. And you'll notice that in trust, it has things like integrity, which is almost the price of entry. But we get down to know your people, which is a leadership attribute in its own right, and part of trust. So this is to say that if you know me, then you are more likely to accept the leadership role that I'm responsible for and follow than if you don't. So when you come into a coaching experience and you're new, there is a trust deficit between you and your players that you now have to overcome. When I stood in front of each of my commands in succession, and they didn't know me and I didn't yet know them, there was a trust deficit that I had to then endeavor to overcome. And part of that is the bottom segment of this, which is about the competence that we project as leaders. And some of that is knowing your stuff. So this is your ability to convey knowledge in your sport, knowledge in your area of expertise. Notice, though, that overlapping is know your people. So this is to say that to be a competent leader, you have to intently know your people and know what they respond to. And they don't all respond the same. So I'll give you a family analogy. I'm the proud father of 3 children. I have identical twin boys. They're grown now and running a business in Hawaii that we were talking about last night. But when they were little boys, I could hardly tell them apart. In fact, on the phone now, I have a difficult time telling them apart. But they were mirror image twins, which means that one of them is extremely right-handed and right-brained, and the other one is extremely left-handed and left-brained. One of them was the pitcher on every baseball team they played on. The other one was the only kid that could catch for his brother. And their personalities were kind of equally opposite, still are. I had one son that I could put my arm around his shoulders and tell him that he'd done something wrong, and he'd beat himself up for the next 3 days over what I told him. That was it. The other boy, to this day, I'd strangle. and that's knowing your people. I mean, so there was one way to handle Mark and one way to handle Brian. And it was knowing those boys that enabled me to do the right thing and get the quick response. And you know this to be true, as for those of you that are in here as coaches, because without that knowledge, you're not as competent as a coach. So you gotta know your people. And so there's a trust element to knowing your people, and there's also a competence element to knowing your people. You know, we might argue it's the most important thing on that board. And then below that, you can see the other words. Are there any questions or comments about what you're seeing? It's not an all-inclusive list, but it's a really key list that, again, we really use when we're evaluating someone's aptitude to go into a major leadership area of responsibility.
Would it be all right if I took a picture then?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll leave behind these slides. If you want.
In your experience, when leadership fails, which of those things is most likely to contribute to that failure?
I'll answer it a couple of different ways. First of all, I don't expect people to be 4-0 in all these areas. No one sitting in this room is. I mean, if we were to self-assess on a 10 scale, you were to grade yourself against those things, I mean, we'd be it'd be interesting to see. First of all, you ought to do it sometime just to see how you assess your aptitude as a leader. But I'll guarantee you we're not all 10s. Some of these areas are easy to develop. You know, I would say easier to develop. Some are not. And some are sort of the natural. So there are, you know, when we say there are natural leaders, so these are people with the composure, the deep voice, the stature to stand in front of, and the will to stand in front of people and lead. And yet, in the military, I would tell you that that's, you know, it's just because you have those traits doesn't necessarily make you a great leader. On the contrary, on the battlefield, we see great leaders emerge every day, often in the lower ranks of our military, among our enlisted, because they're placed into a particular situation that demands leadership, and they're willing to overcome the individual challenges and step up and lead. Some of these issues, we very quickly find ourselves in trouble with a leader if it's up in this area. So it's almost price of entry. I mean, you have to be moral and have integrity in order to be chosen to lead. Some of these other areas, knowing your people, that if that's not your bent, to get to know the people around you, you will have a difficult time in your leadership role. And so some people that are more introverted and may not be naturally inclined to get to know people in the depth that they must, have to overcome that and learn how to go about that task, or they're going to be in trouble in both directions here. And it's actually the areas that we find ourselves criticized often is whether or not we're good communicators. Are we communicating effectively or not? Are we sufficiently decisive? We get criticized at my organization for not being decisive enough in the decision-making processes that we have. And lastly, adaptability. And the adaptability is a little bit of what I was discussing with the boys. So that's knowing your people and knowing what they respond to, or knowing the culture of a team and knowing what the team responds to. You have to be adaptable enough to adjust your leadership style to accomplish that. And it's not always easy. Any others come to mind? Let's look at one that I want to talk about in particular. And we'll talk about the importance of calm under duress. So this will range from the delivery of bad news into your hands to being confronted with a situation that is very difficult. So everyone's under duress, and the leader's responsibility to whether you won or lost the game, and the way you as a coach or you as a player in turn responded. So this is another season. This is the USS Abraham Lincoln. It's Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. It's the biggest warship in the world. It's over 1,000 feet long. It's 100,000 tons. The flight deck is 4.5 acres large, and journalists like to say that it's the most dangerous 4.5 acres on Earth. And at times, it can be. It has a crew complement of 5,500. That includes the airway. And as I stated earlier, the average age of the many colored shirts on the flight deck is about 19 and a half. It was on my ship, which is kind of amazing because as a pilot, they were directing me around the flight deck. Even when I was at my prime as a pilot, we had that much faith in their training and in their competence. It carries about 75 airplanes, and we used to split the airplanes between about half of them going to the hangar bay below decks, and the other half fit on the flight deck. And we often conduct flight operations and both launches and recoveries simultaneously. The Abraham Lincoln in the day that we're going to talk about is we carry the airplane complement that you see there, so F-14s and F-18s and a number of attack airplanes and others. The captain sits in a chair, affectionately termed the captain's chair, high up in that island structure that you see on the left-hand side, and has an expansive view of the flight deck. So we can look back and see an airplane on final coming into land. We can look forward and see the bow of the ship, obviously, and where we're going, but also airplanes that are being catapulted off. And for the captain, he spends most of his time observing the flight deck and the rhythm of the flight deck, which has its own. So in launching and recovering airplanes, we're looking for kind of anomalous things. You know, if we see everybody suddenly, you know, in an untoward fashion scrambling in a direction, our eyes go there. And the captain is always in the chair, has an array of telephones around him, is responsible for the airplanes overhead all the way to 2 of the largest nuclear reactors in a naval application below decks. I would typically work from 6 in the morning to about 1:30 at night when we were flying. And during that little period of sleep, I would receive about 4 or 5 phone calls. And not one time in 2.5 years in command was the phone call to tell me how great things were going on my ship. When an airplane's coming into land, typically the captain will look back and catch that airplane day or night on final and make sure that it's kind of lined up, things look squared away, and the flight deck's clear. And then we go to a thing called the Platt camera, and the Platt camera is a video system where the camera system is actually embedded in the flight deck and projected up the glide path of the airplane. Very precise, has crosshairs on it, and the airplane, we watch this thing incessantly in our ready rooms and stuff because we're all competing in our landing grades, and so we're all watching one another's skill in landing. And if an airplane stays exactly in the center of those crosshairs all the way to landing, he'll catch the number 3 wire or 4, and it'll be likely a well-scored landing. What I'm going to tell you about is a night that was dark and stormy. I want to see how quickly. So we were in the northern Pacific Ocean. I commanded the ship out of Everett, Washington, which is about 25 miles north of Seattle. And we were conducting flight operations in that northern Pacific area right off the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And if you know anything about the Pacific Northwest, it's a pretty stormy area to work. So the seas are usually pretty high, the winds are generally high up there. And this was a nighttime that had no moon and an overcast. And we were well enough off, far enough off the coast where there were no coastal lights to see. So for the pilots, it was a tough night. The ship was moving, not a lot, but it was moving. And that changes what little they do see in orientation as they come into land. And it was high wind, which when you're flying an airplane in the way that we would to land on an aircraft carrier, the wind determines the closure rate of the airplane onto the flight deck. And we do many, many thousands, literally, of practice landings on airfields in nominal conditions. Put us out there behind a boat at night with really high winds, shorten that or extend that closure rate on the flight deck, and the airplane responds differently to power adjustments to stay on the glide path. So that makes it harder too. So all of those factors were in play on this particular night. What I'm going to show you is Abraham Lincoln. It's not the particular one that happened to me, but this is exactly what I saw. Once more. So when I turned to the plat camera and started watching this airplane come into land and saw the mistake the pilot had made, my heart came up in my throat because I knew he wasn't going to make it. In our case, the airplane struck the round down, the rounded area in the back of the carrier deck, and exploded. Sheared the landing gear off, and on fire, the airplane began rocketing down the center line of the landing area to pitch over the side out to sea. And about a second and a half before the airplane pitched over the side, the pilot ejected from it. This was a single-seat airplane at the time, an F-18, another fighter, and his parachute literally opened up in front of my face, right in front of where I was sitting up in the island structure. And he took about a half a swing and then slammed into the flight deck hard. It was so windy that the parachute didn't even collapse. Rather, the canopy just rolled over and started taking him off the side of the ship. And I had enough time to see 3 sailors, of which 2 were women, leap onto him and into the canopy to try to collapse it, to try and prevent the pilot from going over the side. And then it all disappeared over where I could see just because of the shadowing of where I was sitting in the island structure. So I didn't know if he'd gone off the side or if they'd gone off the side or not. And the first thing that I did was turn to look at my bridge crew. And I had a young woman that was the officer of the deck, and then an assistant officer of the deck, 2 young enlisted men that were, one was helmsman, the other was the lee helmsman. I had a navigation team, and I had a quartermaster on the bridge. And everyone had stopped their work. All their eyes were big, and all their eyes were on me. And it occurred to me that they were waiting to see my response to what had just happened. And I recall vividly telling myself to remain calm. I was later being interviewed on the issue of crisis leadership, and this was actually because of the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, and I was the commander of PACOM at the time, and put 24,000 troops in Japan to try and help the Japanese. And I was discussing this with a person that was actually doing their doctoral thesis on crisis leadership. And they talked to the BP oil spill people, the people on the rig, and people in Great Britain. He'd done a lot of work on Fukushima, and he was asking me about my military experience, and when I conveyed this story to him, and when I told him what I just told you, he kind of stopped and he said, "Do you remember that that was a conscious decision that you made?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And he had discovered that in every crisis situation that he'd researched, there was a moment in time when the person in charge, the leader, was confronted with their response. And in the times that there was a successful outcome, they'd all resolved to respond calmly. And he determined that that was about trust. And it was to say that that bridge crew, the entire crew of that ship, all 5,500 of them, knew me and trusted me as their captain under normal operating circumstances. They'd never seen their captain under duress. And that what they were really doing was waiting to see my response to determine if I was worth following again. So this is very much about trust. And for those of you that are responsible, are coaching, imagine, when things are going poorly, how many eyes are on you to see how you're going to respond to the situation that you're in. And we tell this to nuclear executives and nuclear managers as well. They're delivered bad news on a routine basis. Those phone calls at night for me as a captain of a ship were never good news. But the way in which we respond in our leadership role to that news matters a lot. And I think that was our lesson here. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. I'm going to go through it relatively. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Interested to know what was your actual response to this event?
There were a lot of responses to the event. The first was because of the unknowns, to announce a crash on the flight deck and order the medical emergency team to the forward of the island structure, because I didn't know whether the pilot and the crew members were down there or not, and then to call away a man overboard. I have an air boss, I have a lot of leadership help, and the immediate concerns were a fire team that sit exposed in a small vehicle back by the landing area right where that airplane had exploded. And the landing signal officers, the ones that were talking to him that you heard, they have a thing to jump over the side and land in and slide down to the next deck and protect themselves. But we didn't know if they'd been hurt either because the airplane had exploded. And then, if you can imagine, there was a minor, very minimal damage. We had to obviously clean up the flight deck, but we were flying again the next morning. And the pilot survived. He had hurt his back a little bit because of the hard landing on the flight deck. But I visited him that night ward, in our hospital ward. He was doing just fine. And he went on to a Marine Corps career and flew for a long time. So let's just go here for a moment. And it's a little bit academic, but not a lot. So stay with me. So in our business, and I mentioned this to someone earlier, I think it may have been Coach Weiss, but we, recognizing that there are 100,000 books out there on leadership and 100,000 different ways to talk about it, in our business, we chose to distill that down to what was important in leadership in our business. In order to spread that around the commercial nuclear power industry within the energy sector of the United States and begin to advance leadership in a common way with attributes that everybody recognized and that we could evaluate too in my institute. And we did the same thing with team attributes as well. And I'm not going to show those to you today, but we've developed those as well. And they're very much about team effectiveness because we have a lot of teams managing nuclear power plants, as you might expect. And so there are 9 things up there. There are more words than that, but let me read them to you for a moment so I can show you the division. In the area, and there's logic to it. So there's 5 categories of leadership traits. The first says that a leader establishes vision and strategy. So as a coach, you get that. But we see some leaders short in that or without that, and that matters a lot. The second 2 are their responsibility to, we would say, maximize competence of the people that they're leading, and that is to develop talent and to foster learning. And learning is more than teaching, and so I'll show you what we consider to be learning here in a moment. So that's 3. In the middle are the responsibilities to engage the workforce, engage the team. And this is a responsibility to align it, so align the organization, inspire and motivate it. We talked about that in the definition of leadership. Build and sustain trust within that organization, trust of you and trust of them, of one another. And lastly, to coach and foster accountability within that team. And if you can't relate to that, I'd be really surprised, because as a former player, I can. And then the last 2 is the responsibility to cope with risk, and this is about decision making. So we're in the nuclear industry, and we have to do everything right. So this is a big deal for us, is the way in which we decision with a risk basis. In aviation, it was a pretty punitive area if you made the wrong decision. Similarly, the decision making was our ability to cope with risk. I would offer you have the same challenge. And then lastly, it's to achieve sustainable results. So at the end of the day, it's a leadership attribute to get to the goal. It's a leadership attribute to achieve the objective. And the objective is established here. So there's logic to it. And when we evaluate the utilities in their ability to do this at their nuclear power plants, we can find strengths and weaknesses up and down this. If you were to self-assess in these 9 areas, you would find that we're not all 10s here either. So before we look at the aptitude to be a leader, so this is your, kind of the condition set to be chosen as a leader. In this case, this is what you're responsible for once you are. And these are also learned and developed traits. Some more difficult than others, as you might imagine. Any thoughts on any of those that strike you? Okay. I'm going to talk about one. And you might have imagined that I would pick it given my audience today. It's about coaching. And this is another C story. So this is a different time in my career. In fact, going backwards, I was commanding one of the 2 fighter squadrons in a battle group. And this battle group was one of the larger, this is back in kind of the Reagan era of a bigger Navy, so we were a bigger battle group than we are today. And we'd been assigned to sail to the North Arabian Sea. Iran and Iraq had been at war for about 10 years, and Iran was threatening to close the things that go around, come around, so this is Iran, threatening to close the Straits of Hormuz, the exit from the Persian Gulf, to Iraqi oil traffic. And our allies in Asia and in Europe were heavily dependent on Middle East oil, still are. And so the U.S. Navy was ordered to go to the North Arabian Sea and prevent the Straits of Hormuz from being closed. So our adversary in this case was Iran, more than Iraq. This is before the invasion of Kuwait, but Iran and Iraq were at war. And I had a proficiency problem. In my particular squadron, much as we do often, I had 4 pilots assigned to my squadron just before we weighed anchor and sailed. And they had just come out of F-14 training. They were lacking experience. And frankly, we were spending most of our time as we transited the Pacific and Indian Oceans just getting them safe in launching and landing off the aircraft carrier. And at times, we're too far away from a divert field to be able to go anywhere if it doesn't work out. So we had to concentrate more on that and on their combat skills. Slide. This was about proficiency. And this is actually a list. I'm helping the nuclear power industry understand the science and art of accomplishing, maximizing competence of people. So this is kind of the last academic thing I'll ask you to glance at. This says that proficiency is more than just education and training. We did a lot of training in the Navy, as you might imagine. But this is about the sufficiency of the education to impart knowledge, the sufficiency of the training to impart very basic skill, minimum qualification, you know, think of that. Repetition to impart familiarity, experience to impart deep understanding, timeliness to impart currency, and then it's the innate self-awareness that an individual has on how proficient they are or they aren't. And then lastly, their anticipation that their proficiency, no matter what it is, can be challenged by the next set of circumstances. And is every day, more or less. We call education and training teaching. We call the sum of all those things learning. And if you remember the leadership attributes, there is a leadership attribute in maximizing competence that says foster learning, which says that we foster more than education and training. Coaches know this. And this is a coaching story, so I think you'll appreciate this. So I had certainly an experience problem, but even a problem in other areas among these 4 young aviators because of what we were focusing them on in lieu of the prospect of confronting the Iranians, who, if you remember back, those of you old enough to remember back to the Shah of Iran, the United States had sold them some very high-end warfighting equipment, including the F-14 Tomcat. So these young kids were had a prospect of confronting the same airplane that they were flying, but with combat experienced aviators on the other end. And so I'm going to take you into this is what I really came to talk to you about. And this is the F-14 maneuvering diagram, which I'm teasing, I don't take it through. That vertical axis is in turn rate in degrees per second. The horizontal axis is in airspeed. The F-14 could fly at about Mach 2.2. So it was a very fast airplane. The curve on the left is the stall curve of the airplane. This is its ability to generate lift. And if the airflow is disrupted over the wings, the airplane's nose falls down and sometimes departs, and you can't generate turn anymore. The curve on the upper right is the stress curve, so we assign a stress limit in training to these airplanes. We would do what's needed to be done in combat, but in training, we limited the airplane to 6.5 Gs because of the wear and tear on the airplane over its lifespan. So this was to get the airplane through its lifespan. And if you went beyond that point, you overstressed the airplane and had the potential to break something. And then lastly, there were problems if you overspeed the airplane with some temperatures and so forth in the engines and stuff. That area in the upper center of the curves where it's circled is affectionately termed corner. And that's where the lift limit of the airplane intersects the G limit of the airplane and where the maximum turning rate can be achieved. In order to be very competent in air combat, pilots had to be very competent at flying at or near corner in order to maximize the ability to turn the airplane, bring its nose to bear on an adversary airplane, and take a shot. The problem with corner is that there's risk there. If you go to the left of corner and exceed stall, you will depart the airplane. That's a low-speed departure, usually recoverable. If you're at higher speed and you exceed it, then you have the prospect of a high-speed departure very violent, so that this will knock your head against the canopy and disorient you very quickly. And sometimes it'll take the airplane into uncontrolled flight that is not recoverable. That's termed a flat spin. And if that occurs, we have no choice but to eject. And yet, the problem that I had and the proficiency challenge that I had was I had 4 pilots that couldn't fly there with great confidence. And we had to figure out what to do about it. So I brought my section leaders and division leaders together, the senior leaders in the squadron, and we talked about it. And we had a number of choices. One was take them up to the North Arabian Sea and don't let them fly. And frankly, I didn't have enough pilots to do that, I didn't think. That wasn't a very good choice. We could let the radar intercept officer try to coach the pilot. The problem was they're not skilled on the flight controls and all that it takes to manage the airplane through its performance. Even though we had very experienced radar intercept officers, it wasn't the optimum choice either. We could have the pilot in the other airplane in a section try to train them and teach them this, but the problem with coaching from another airplane is you're not in the cockpit knowing what is really going on. And then the last choice was we would take the radar intercept officer out, put a qualified pilot, experienced pilot in, and try to coach them through this inside their airplane. The challenge with that is the pilot in the back doesn't have any flight controls. As we looked around the room and were trying to decide who should do this coaching, I was commanding. Eventually all eyes came to me because I was in my 17th consecutive year of flying. I had instructed 3 times, and I had just recently left Navy Fighter Weapons School with Top Gun as an instructor for more than 3 years. And I had the most experience in coaching pilots to that point. So, slide. For the next 10 days, flying 2 to 3 times a day, I climbed in the back seat with these 4 young pilots and took them through the paces. We flew as fast as the airplane could go. We flew as slow as the airplane could go. In fact, we took it into the vertical and ran it out airspeed and let it back down on itself and flop down. Took them through the entire maneuvering envelope and spent a lot of time in corner. And we made mistakes. We departed slow speed. We departed a few times at high speed and got our attention. And we did it over and over again. And when we were through, we had what we thought were some pretty confident, motivated, and better skilled young pilots that we took to the North Arabian Sea with us. And in fact, they did very well in later deployments in Desert Storm. 2 of them went on to be Top Gun instructors before they left and graduated farther into the Navy. Slide, please. And this is what we learned. I mean, we actually came away, and I came away with a greater appreciation for what coaching can really do. And recall that it wasn't just teaching. We didn't try to do this in a classroom. And it wasn't just basic training, but rather we were trying to combine motivating these young people with repeating, so we're in the learning phase now. We're trying to run them many times through the drill until they develop the necessary confidence. And we did do some teaching. So we did a lot of pre-briefs and a lot of debriefs on what went on in the air. And they became pretty skilled young pilots as a result. Slide. So one last video, and this will conclude our discussion, and I'll open it to questions. And indeed, Jay mentioned it, but I happened to be at Top Gun when Paramount showed up in town. And so we did take them through the movie, and I was placed in charge of the flying for the movie and flew in many of the scenes in the small airplanes. And in the scene that I'll show you, I'm in the little brown airplane. I'm Jester, if you can imagine. But folks at INPO, at my company, wanted badly for me to show you this. you know, as we go forward. So this is a little more modern than the last one I showed you, and you might recall this from something you've seen on television or at the movies. That little airplane is an A4.
A hot neck for this up is 10,000 feet. You knew it, you broke it. You followed Commander Headley below after he lost sight of you and called no joy. Wow.
Sir, I had Commander Heatherly in my sights. He saw me move in for the kill. He then proceeded below the hard deck. We weren't below 10,000 for more than a few seconds. I had the shot. There was no danger, so I took it.
You took it. And broke a major rule of engagement.
Then you broke another one with that circus stunt flyby. Lieutenant Mitchell, Top Gun rules of engagement exist for your safety and for that of your team. They are not flexible, nor am I. Either obey them or you are history. Is that clear? Yes, sir.
So we actually use that for an accountability discussion as we're talking about coaching. And that concludes my remarks. Again, I hope that as you went through that, you saw some relevance to the things that you're doing. I do, certainly as a former athlete and a great admirer of good coaching. And I would tell you that in our industry, believe it or not, we're trying to develop coaches among executives, good coaches among the management team, and good coaches among frontline supervisors of maintenance teams and others. Like all the other things that we've talked about, good coaching is not a foregone conclusion. What it takes to be a good coach, the leadership that's involved in being a great coach, is something that is learned and developed, and we have to grow proficient at over time. And experience plays a great, very important role in all of that. But if you imagine the influence that you have as coaches over the young people. Everybody, I still have people that come up to me and remind me that I coached them at one point as a Top Gun instructor, and I don't even remember. You know, I mean, holy smokes! And they're telling me how it changed their life. And I would offer that from your topmost player, wrestler, you know, to dash 20. Every one of them is being immensely influenced by what you do, by what you say, by the facts that we're talking about here. So, God bless all of you for what you do. It's not lost on me that this is the oldest Division I athletic staff in the country. And I would tell you that those naval officers and young people that I saw over time with Harvard undergraduate degrees meant a lot to us in the services and continue to. So you're having a profound effect, and we're looking for leaders, and you're helping develop them. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today, and I'll take questions if we have time. This is up to you. Any thoughts?
Well, I'll jump in. Because I'm old. We're all the time using analogies from the military in terms of developing trust. So when you can't count on a guy to get a practice on time, or to pay attention to a certain drill that keeps him responsible or keeps his doubles partner in a match, we'll often talk about the guy that packed someone else's parachute. And when he gives his word that he inspected that parachute, that means something. That's why they have the honor code at the Naval Academy, Military Academy. And so we're always trying to
Find analogies.
find analogies to get across the essential nature of trust, integrity, keeping your word, doing things that you may not like to do, but are necessary for the team. So, certainly speaking for myself, I think probably everybody else, when we see the real life examples of how important it is, it just reinforces for us.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you.
I would tell you that I was sharing this with my institute when we were beginning the discussions of leadership. And when I think back on my own experience, I've only kind of been in organizations that really were the real kind of effective teams a couple of times, where they were a real machine. You become a member of the team, you know, it's a whirlwind until they spit you out the other end and you go, wow, what an experience that was. Top Gun was one of those places. There were 19 instructors in the school. These were the very best pilots out of their respective squadrons. They were pretty magnificent aviators. But we also emphasized our ability to teach, and we emphasized our ability to coach in the air, and to actually expand that into teaching to the entire aviation community in the Navy. And what we demanded of each other, so it's the accountability piece, so that the trust between instructors, the fact that we all supported one another and watched one another's back and were more interested, or trying to be as interested in their success as our own, but also had immense responsibility to be high performing ourselves and to also be trusted ourselves. That was the nature of that team. And you only get a chance to experience that, I think, the previous experiences that I had were in sports. Where we were really a team that looked out for each other, that tried to be high performing in our own right, and excel and achieve what our objective was. And then our team effectiveness attributes that we've created at my company for the industry, we capture that, and we capture it in exactly the sense that you bring it. You have a question?
Yeah. So, what were the parallels that you could say take from the football field into the cockpit? under, say, stress and performance? What was?
Yeah, a lot of them. First of all, that kind of flying is a very physical sport. I mean, you know, and it's, people have asked me, what's it like? You know, and you can talk about what a catapult shot's like or what a landing feels like. But when we get into air combat maneuvering, when the fight's on, it is immensely violent and physical. And, you know, and we're bending around trying to keep an airplane in sight that's behind us and between our tails or across the circle from us, you know, several miles. It's very demanding in terms of you know, the physical work you're doing in the cockpit, and then you're under G-forces. So it's, you know, so you weigh 6 times as much as you normally do, and your arms are heavy, and you're still trying to move your head around, and you got a 12-pound helmet on, and you know, and so all of that comes into play. So the physicality of it is one. The teamwork aspects of it. So when we go into a fight, and it's 4 of us, our ability to conduct the operation, the tactics together, and be synchronized, have split-second expert communication, you know, and get the job done. There's, you know, so when 4 F-14s is 8 aviators, all working together as a team. So I could go on and on. There are just many analogies to the sports experiences I had, you know, into the flying experiences that I had in the Navy. It's the reason why your ROTC programs are so valuable, because eventually we'll hopefully see Harvard graduates in the cockpit, you know, performing some of this. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I'm just impressed with the, I'm not in the athletic field, I don't coach, but I do teach, and in the medical profession, similar qualities are needed, and this is a terrific talk. And those of us who are responsible for medical students, residents, who are in training, we have to have respect for the people teaching, and I think it's just a wonderful message.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In fact, I was in Minneapolis at a conference for a group that does similar work inside the medical community for children's hospitals, in fact, that we do at INPO inside the nuclear community. And I took, you know, a similar message, a more expansive teaching message to them on leadership and worked them through it. And there is a great deal of commonality in how you achieve high performance. We term excellence in everything that we do. So thanks for that. I'll let you go because I know you've all got busy days, and this is a work day for you, a fun day for me. But again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, Jay and David. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share a message with Harvard. I'm so impressed that I had the chance to be here. Thank you very much.